Welcome to this video on the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Madeleine McCann case has been covered for many years now. It continues to gain interest as the years have gone by rather than lose interest, and that is something I'd like to address. I frequently get requests to analyze whatever their latest statement is, and I thought maybe it'd be best to cover some of the aspects of that and then perhaps some plans for the future. In the Madeleine McCann case, the little girl Madeleine went missing and she was reported by her parents. At YouTube, a documentary by Richard Hall exists in which statement analysis is highlighted called Embedded Confession. So if you go to YouTube and search on Embedded Confession of McCann or Richard Hall, you'll be able to get a little bit of an insight into my conclusions regarding that case. When the parents of Madeleine McCann first spoke in the early days of the interviewing, they were indicated for deception and guilty knowledge of what happened to the child, as well as their participation in the cover-up and disposing of the body. I don't believe that, from the language at least, that the death was intentional, but very likely came as a result of the McCanns anesthetizing the child in order for them to go out to a dinner party with friends. This type of gross negligence, of course, is criminal, as well as a violation of medical ethics, but I don't believe they intended to kill the child. The language of the parents is different. Both are deceptive and both are in cover-up mode. I do not see signs of sociopathy in the language of the mother. I need to study a little more on the language of the father, but a well-respected investigator and former military intelligence has told me he believes that the father is indeed sociopathic or sociopathic-like in his language. So it is something to look at. But the case continues to be very popular among those who follow true crime, but it's also popular among people who don't. Those who follow true crime like to see results. They like to see justice, answers to the puzzle as they become more and more distant from the actual emotions of the case. The reason why I don't dedicate a lot of time to analyzing the latest things that the McCanns have said is because of the lack of the free editing process of which they're now using. This is called self-reference. It means if you ask me what happened this morning and I describe what happened, and then you ask me again and again and again, eventually I'm going to disengage from freely choosing my words and work from self-reference. Self-reference is seen this way. Like I said earlier, like I told the other investigator, just as I previously said, I already answered that. In other words, I'm no longer engaging experiential memory. I'm working from the memory of my words spoken previously. And so at this point, as years go by, it would be very easy for the McCanns to issue a reliable denial. It is not a reliable denial. The time for that was years ago. And their language shows in the expected versus the unexpected that they had already processed her death. Therefore, here's where the interest comes and grows. They build up a tolerance against their own deception. They build up a tolerance against their own guilt. And what people are seeing is, especially in the profiteering, and profiteering is something that we look behind it for guilt, is we're seeing a growing contempt for the public as the years have gone by. They have held the public in contempt from the beginning because, remember, anyone that is deceptive, and I mean that in terms of inappropriately deceptive, not withholding medical information or not law enforcement where they're not allowed to speak of facts, negotiators who are appropriately, deceptively withholding information, military intelligence. The inappropriate deception has an element of contempt for the audience. In some personalities, this develops very early. As early as kindergarten, you'll see a 5 or a 6-year-old literally hold a teacher in contempt as he or she fabricates, and mostly this is in the males. It is why we correct our children, teach them that lying is wrong. Because it's a natural part of human nature. It is part of the early narcissism that we all have to protect oneself. Did you take the cookie? I didn't take the cookie. Panic lies. I was at work on time. And we look for later on, including an employment analysis, someone who doesn't have that high level of contempt, who feels badly about being deceptive. Hey, I was 10 minutes late for work. I'll stay late today. I apologize. That sort of responsibility. What you're seeing with the McCanns, and this goes right into their profiteering, Davy Blackburn is another example of someone who was deceptive and then profits off that deception. And this is relatively common in our society. A lot of times people will make a false report and go right to GoFundMe. The fake hate reports are not only attention-seeking, but also exploitative. Well, in the case of the McCanns, you see the tolerance built up against any type of empathy for their audience. They literally hold their audience in contempt, but the difference here is that the contempt has grown over the years. The average person, say in the United Kingdom, who's watching them on television or reading the statements, is naturally engaged with anger. This person is insulting me. It's one of the great works of politicians. They constantly hold their audience in contempt as they exploit them and praise them. Well, the McCanns are doing the same thing. As they continue to profit off her death, as they raise money for themselves, the contempt has grown. With the contempt, we see arrogance. With arrogance, we find error. Their guard continues to go down against their own language. And so, in one sense, we don't want to hear the same stories of self-referencing. We need new questions. One of the things I may do in an upcoming project, I'm working with Richard Hall on another documentary, but one of the things I may do in a new project is assemble a team of certified analysts and criminal investigators and look for what is called leakage in the language of, and particularly, Mrs. or the mother McCann, Kate McCann. Leakage is not like deception detection. Deception detection should run at or near 100% accuracy. One of the things I ask viewers to consider is go to 2012 and look at the case of the disappearance of Isabel Chellis. The analysis showed that the father was deceptive in his 911 call, his emergency call, and showed indications or a list of linguistic type of correlation or consistency with sexual abuse. And in subsequent interviews, the analysis was affirmed. And then recently, the FBI made an arrest, and there's been an indictment of a sex predator, not a conviction, but an indictment of a sex predator who has implicated the father, of whom is identified in terms of deception from the analysis. And what I ask you to consider is be patient. Be patient and trust in the investigators to complete the work that's involved there. So that type of deception detection should run at or near 100% accuracy and should withstand all healthy scientific scrutiny. Recently, I've run through more than 50 investigators and analysts with countless years of homicide investigation. And no errors have been found, more depth has been obtained, and an affirmation of this deception has been made. So when the McCann spoke originally, the deception was there, and embedded admission was there. This is sometimes called a pronoun confession. When someone is speaking regarding guilt, with an L, we do not expect them to take possession of that guilt. Our guilt is called an embedded confession or an embedded admission. One of the McCann said, the mother said of her missing, quote unquote, child, we did an incredible job of hiding the body, or hiding her. Recently there was a Republican candidate from the state of Vermont who received an anonymous threatening letter. The analysis of the letter showed that there wasn't any threat, and the author is very likely a female, and the first suspect of that authorship should be the recipient, the politician or the woman that wants to be a politician from Vermont. One of the things she said in a follow-up as she posted this was my first official death threat. The numeric suggests a consideration of another one. Official is an unnecessary word of which we will then say, have you received unofficial death threats? And what does an unofficial death threat look like compared to an official death threat? But more importantly than anything else is that she was threatened with hunting, death, and then rape, and then the screams from rape, out of chronological order, but was the pronoun my. If you or I had received a death threat, would we claim it as our own? That's something that is frightening and terrorizing. We would not. The McCanns use this expression, our guilt. Would you take ownership of guilt that's not yours? That's against human nature. Pronouns are instinctive, they're intuitive. They cannot be legislated by politicians to be changed. That won't work. That's why they need coercion of fines and all sorts of penalties, including loss of a job, because they're instinctive and they're intuitive. You and I have been using the pronoun I literally millions of times. That means the processing from the brain to the tongue has been done so many times that the pathway is pure, simple, and without impedance. When you see impedance on the pronoun I, and a stutter from a non-stuttering person, it's a very strong indicator of an acute anxiety increasing. It can get to a certain point that can indicate a nervous breakdown. The word we is a word that represents unity and cooperation. We've seen this in statements of sexual assaults. However, when the assault begins, the we, the connection, the unity, it disappears. For a victim of a sexual assault, there is no cooperation. There's no we between you and me during that assault. It's fine to see it before, but not once the assault takes place. With very few exceptions, this is a great indicator. I once had a case in which politicians became involved in a sexual assault case, and there was quite a bit of pressure. And due to some strange and unusual physical disabilities, there was a lack of physical evidence. Yet once politicians become involved, all that matters to them is perception. They need to be perceived as on the side of the victim. In this particular case, I interviewed the victim. I was moved by her testimony. I struggled a little bit with tears. I had to keep that. But because of the training, when I heard the pronoun we enter her statement right after the assault, I knew she was deceptive. At the time, my superior said to me, "Do you wish to hang an entire case on a single pronoun? Your reputation, my reputation, our reputation on a pronoun?" I said I did. I respected her, she respected me, and she said, "So be it, what do you recommend?" And I said, well, given the sensitive nature of this case, I think she should be confronted in a place of support, like her therapist's office or her doctor's office, because she could really go to pieces here. She was confronted with it and said, "This shows that you're not telling the truth." And almost without emotion, she said, "Yeah, that's true." She was asked, "Were you willing that this young man go to prison because you lied?" And she said, without missing a beat, "Yeah, he broke up with me." So if I had not been trained in statement analysis, I may have missed that. And that's a frightening thing. So deception detection should run at or near 100%, but the topic of leakage is not anywhere near as accurate. It is somewhat educated guesswork. For example, if you went into a therapist's office and you commented to the therapist, and hopefully the therapist has training, how cold the weather is. And then you mention how cold it is out there and how I'm feeling cold. After a while, the therapist may say, "Is he or she lonely?" Has something gone wrong in a relationship? That's an example of leakage. When a little baby here, a little toddler here in Maine went missing, the father was deceptive. He failed his polygraph, but he was deceptive about what happened to his daughter. And he refused to speak to media. Now consider this. When you go shopping and you take your little toddler and you hold hands, if you let go of the hand for a moment, you naturally look over for him or her. If she wanders away, the first thing you'll do is call her and look for her. It's a natural reaction. It's the same thing linguistically and the same thing in behavioral analysis. When this little child went missing, the father claimed that she was kidnapped, but he refused to call out to the kidnapper. He refused to meet media. In fact, he issued a statement that he was emotionally incapable at this time of speaking to the public, which meant, as the police set up a media scenario so he could address the kidnappers, we knew there was no kidnapping. It's a natural reaction for a father or a mother, or most people, in fact, most caretakers, to immediately look for that which is missing, to immediately call out to our own child. He went further, however. He was angry that the child's mother was saying he wasn't cooperating with police. And he said, contrary to rumors floating around out there, I have been cooperating with the police. Contrary to rumors floating around out there. And this is an example of leakage. This is a signal of what he's thinking about and suppressing, or attempting to suppress, the body dumped in water, while he's speaking of something else. So it is not as precise, anywhere near as precise as statement analysis. It is less than content analysis, which can run 80, 90%, and anonymous author identification, which runs, if successfully, about 70%. Meaning that if I can give you 7 out of 10 traits of an anonymous author or anonymous sender of bombs, anonymous terrorist, you're very likely to be able to identify that particular author. This is beneath that, but it's important. And so one of the projects we may do regarding the disappearance of Madeleine McCann is an exhaustive search in the language, particularly of Kate McCann, where she may have inadvertently revealed the location of Madeleine's McCann's.